Well, hi. I've parked up in the quietest place I could find to have a coffee, which is Flat White, New Zealand staple. I've come out really just to clear my head and to talk about, because my headspace at the moment is all about the Apology, Plato, and really process why it's made me angry. It really has. I've read it before, studied it at university. It's never had this effect. So why would it make me angry? It's really because I think for the first time I've come to the conclusion that Socrates almost willed himself to be found guilty. And then when it came to what punishment he should receive, he needled the good, the men that had to decide, to give him the harshest punishment. Of course they did, it was death. He could have got away with it. So it's about how do you process that? How the death of Socrates is so well known, you could argue it's like a bedrock of Western society. Plato obviously has given us one version that could be biased. But generally, he would have written it at the time, well, he did write it at the time, where most people would have known what happened, and he would have been called out for it. But I don't think we've got much in terms of other people saying, no, he's made that up. So he was close to accurate for what happened at the trial. But it's just it's just the power of literature that can really have an emotive reaction in you. And, poetry, hello there, Phil, in Australia, and also other literature, Shakespeare, sonnets, love stories, whatever, romances, they can have a real effect on you. And with Plato and the trial, definitely it's happened for the first time for me. It's amazing that you can read it and read it and read it, and then suddenly... So a mate of mine who I served in the Navy, he lives in New Zealand as well now, and we hooked up and we've recorded together. He is a committed Christian and a pastor of a church. He gets really emotional when he's considering the crucifixion and the trial of Jesus and his death. As you would expect, that's his faith. So the power of words and simple things on a page, the tale that they tell, really can have an effect on you. I think that's half the beauty of books. But the trial of Socrates is one of those. I don't feel aggrieved for him that he died. He was an old man, and like I say, he could have got away with it. But he decided not to. We don't know the reasons why. That's not said. For all we know, he may have had a terminal illness, or he thought he's going to go out in a blaze of glory. I don't know. Certainly with the Apology. A lot more is said with the Credo, and then obviously about what he talks just before he takes the hemlock and all that, which I'll do later. But yeah, it's amazing that words can have that effect on you. So, the Apology. So this is the book that I'm referring to, Plato. There's Republic in here, Charmides, Meno, the Symposium, which is a lovely one about love, and the Apology. The Last Days of Socrates is another book in which you get Crito and Phaedo. The Last Days of Socrates, well, really the Apology as such in Crito, have come down to us as really important documents from the past, the ancient times, in which people grappled with how we could know things, and specifically how we should behave. And the Apology is more than just Socrates on trial. However annoying the end is, as I said in the car. And the story goes, I'll just put this down. I've got so many books here now, trying to find a space. So the story is, Socrates is an old man, and he has been well known for decades in Athens. He's been very brave. He went to war, and he never shirked from being in the front line. He never lost his bravery. And he certainly was a man controlled by his wife. And Xantippe, wonderful woman. More should be said about her. Supposedly, he annoyed her so much she threw a piss pot over his head. You can imagine that. And he didn't get upset about it. So as he grew older, he got followers around him who were enamored by his thought and what he was thinking of. And basically what it is that in that part of the world at that time, the ancient Greek world, there wasn't a school system as such, but it was important for, and unfortunately we've got to talk about the men, sorry ladies, the men had to be prepared for quite a litigious life. The Greeks sued everyone whenever they could. So therefore, with a law system in which it was down to you to prove whether you should win a court or not, it was based on how eloquent you could speak, rhetoric, how well you could defend yourself in front of a big audience, often in the boule, which was like the law courts, and there could be anything up to 500 people. So you had to learn how to conduct yourself. There's no schools in which you can learn that. So there were itinerant teachers going around the whole Greek world who became known as sophists. And they charged a lot of money. So the rich and wealthy made sure that their sons, at great cost, was indoctrinated would be the wrong word, but cultured into the Greek way of thinking. Reverence of the gods, which on Olympus, Zeus, and making sure that you were a good citizen, in this case, Athenian. So Socrates comes along and he criticizes the whole system by saying, look, if you are an itinerant teacher, doesn't mean you're going to be telling the truth. And he refused to take money for it for that one reason. He said the truth doesn't need money. Now, of course, I'm an ex-teacher. I was a teacher for 20 odd years. And I was inculcated, that's a good word, isn't it, into teaching against a national curriculum, both in the UK and here in New Zealand. So in a way, I had no ability to go beyond the curriculum, but there's some flexibility, especially in the UK where I taught philosophy, ethics, and religious studies, not religious instruction. You're looking at the world religions as part of an ethical understanding of debates like abortion and euthanasia and war. So to be criticised as not telling the truth would hurt. So no doubt these sophists were hurt by the fact that this guy Socrates came along and started needling everyone. But he was listened to by the youth. So at his trial, after many, many years of upsetting the great and good, he was accused of corrupting the youth of Athens and being impious against the gods. And he defends himself in the trial against those two accusations. Now, the first one is probably the easiest one to get across is the impiety. So in ancient Greece, to be a theist, theos, meant you accepted the gods of the state. And that is Zeus and Hera and Athena and all those. Socrates says he's not that he's against the gods. He's not atheos, an atheist. He believes that they're more important things to focus on. And of course, he'd got it that way for many years, but eventually it was a pretty weak argument against him, because he said, look, I believe in the gods. And he says, did ever man, and Miletus is the guy who is the one who accuses him, brings together all the charges. He said, "Did ever man Meletus believe in the existence of human things and not of human beings? Did ever any man believe in horsemanship and not in horses? Can a man believe in spiritual and divine agencies and not in spirits or demigods? He cannot." And so therefore his argument was, no, he's not against the gods because he believes in the spiritual. He just effectively focuses on something else. So the charge could be either way, neutral on that one, whether he answers the charge or not. So here he is. He's an old man. He's in his 70s. He said, "I am more than 70 years of age and appearing now for the first time in a court of law. I am quite a stranger to the language of the place." And he says, "My accusers, they almost made me forget who I was." So we've had the accusation against him, and then he gets to speak. "They have hardly uttered a word of truth." What is it? Someone said on American TV recently, he said, "Everything you said was correct apart from all of it." "They said that you should be upon your guard and not allow yourselves to be deceived by the force of my eloquence." He was a well-known, good public speaker. But what he said didn't really impress those above him. And one of the things that comes out in the apology is, well, there's two things. And it's, I think, been something of contention throughout history, mainly from a faith-based perspective, the fact that the shared Western history after Jesus became Christian. He was 2 or 3 centuries before then. And he talks about the fact that there is this voice, this presence that's in him. Modern New Age thinking would say it's he was channeling, or he could hear conversations beyond himself. He was an empath or whatever. But in those days, he talked about the voice, and he heard it clearly, and he told him how to behave in certain situations and what to do and what to say. But that's not the thing that made him really famous. What made him famous was the Delphic oracle, who, when asked, not by himself, who is the wisest man, the oracle said, Socrates. And he had to, this is Socrates, had to defend himself consistently after that point. Because in effect, it was like a tall poppy. Suddenly his head was raised, his presence was raised above the parapet, and people were going to try and cut him down. When he heard that the Delphic oracle had stated that he is wise, he went out and asked people, and he said, "I went to all the experts, the people that are known in society." Oh, there's an alarm. They agree. And said to, like, politicians and statesmen and people in the public arena, what makes you wise? And he came to the conclusion, which bear in mind how this would have gone down with the people he's spoken to. He said, the difference is that they're not wise. They think they are. They think they know everything. Why then am I, Socrates, wise? Because I know I don't know anything. And that is a challenge to anybody in authority, even now. I mean, if I was to go out and interview the great and the good and say, what makes you so special? Why are you considered a guardian of the people's welfare, or you know stuff and therefore you're going to speak? And then afterwards I say publicly, well, they don't know anything. They think they do, but they don't. I'm better because I know nothing. You can imagine how that would go down now and then. And that's something that's ridden all the way through history. He was probably the first in the Western culture to stand up against people suddenly getting into power and then thinking they know everything. And I, unfortunately, have had managers who, we used to call it the backroom lads coming into the front office, and suddenly they kind of don't want to know people they knew before. You know, it's like going up that greasy pole. And what do they say? If you kick people going up the pole, they're going to kick you when you come down. A lot of people take on the mantle of high leadership not very well. And they suddenly think that they've arrived and they know everything, and everyone must bow down to their supreme wisdom. Socrates was totally against that. And he defends himself quite well throughout. He says, the accusations against me have arisen out of a sort of wisdom which I possess. I went about searching after a man who was wiser than myself, at first, as I said, among the politicians and among the philosophers, and found that I had an advantage over them because I had no conceit of knowledge. And I think that's what the Apology is as famous for, if anything. He then also talks about, hang on, I'm being accused of corrupting the youth. Now, the youth over the years have grown up. They're now old men or middle-aged men. Bring them forward. Let them say that they agree that I have corrupted them. And of course, no one does. No one comes forward. So he argues that to be an upright man, or woman, Reg, but man in that time and place, you have to effectively pursue the truth. He's also famous for know thyself. But people don't, because it's not in their interest to follow the truth, especially in a litigious society where you just have to wheedle your words and win an argument, even though it may be against the truth. And that's what he really was against. And Plato, obviously. Plato was his student who heard the trial, was there. It's actually mentioned in the Apology. And he said, Socrates, let no man fear death or fear anything but disgrace. So he was prepared to suffer death and disgrace if it meant standing up for the truth. For the fear of death is indeed not real wisdom, being a pretense of knowing the unknown. And no one knows whether death, which men in their fear apprehend to be the greatest evil, may not be the greatest good. There is a bit of arrogance, however. So we have the Socratic dialogue where Socrates would ask a question, for instance, like, which is not really here in the Apology, but in the other books by Plato, he would consider something like bravery, courage. What is courage? And someone would say, fighting, blah, blah, blah. And he said, is it really? He said, but what about a woman about to give birth, that kind of stuff? But he can be arrogant. He could be arrogant. And he said this at the trial. He said, I am a gadfly. And a gadfly obviously stings. Actually, what does a gadfly sting? Are the horses? That's a horsefly. I don't know what a gadfly does. But they sting people, perhaps. I am the gadfly of the Athenian people, given to them by God. And they will never have another if they kill me. Me, he says, who am his gift to you. When he was found guilty, he then was allowed to speak as to what the punishment should be. And of course, all his life, he had effectively said, I don't get paid. I don't get paid for this. He says it as his trial. Everything, the pursuit of truth should not warrant being paid. And he said, the state is a great and noble steed who is tardy in his motions and requires to be stirred into life. That's his job. In a voice. And then he goes on and says, you should pay me. You should put me into a position, enshrine me as a good thing for the state. Because he said the judge should not be influenced by feelings, but convinced by reason. Well, he made it an unreasonable proposition to obviously proud men at that time. And therefore they voted the harshest punishment of all, death. The shock of that rings throughout history. I'm reading, can't find it now, it's here somewhere. Meditations by Marcus Aurelius. And he talks about this. He actually says those men who put Socrates to death were vermin. And there are people now who get really upset about the fact that he was put to death. So he was. He lost the trial. But like I said in the car, I can't help feeling that he willed the harshest punishment. So there was quite a hardness to Socrates. He was a difficult man. He was ugly. He never dressed. He didn't care what people thought of him. He was difficult to talk to. Often his conversations get lost in the weeds. Certainly the way Plato wrote about him, and certainly in the later period, Plato himself, his writing gets, I would say, darker. The difference between the Republic, which I believe is mid-term of his works, to the Laws, like chalk and cheese. So, but he's still using the device of Socrates mainly to put across what plainly is no longer Socratic thought, it's Platonic thought towards the end. But Socrates, even when he was alive, it wasn't just Plato that ended up writing about him. He's in plays, he's in the clouds. Is it Aeschylus or Sophocles? It might be Sophocles, the play, which pokes fun at Socrates and his thinkery, and he's up in the clouds. And it's had a real effect on history. He's the template to look for of the person who was prepared to be a whistleblower. Well, would he be a whistleblower? Don't think he would be that, but he would stand up publicly against those in power. And we see them as good things, but not necessarily at the time that they're doing it. History tends to look back more favourably on that kind of person than we do at the time. And just think of our own period in history. But that's the positive side to Socrates. You could all equally point it from another point of view, that he was a traitor and he was deliberately undermining the state. So it depends how you wish to see him. But again, wonderful for making you think. And in this case, making me annoyed. Anyway, that's Plato's The Apology, the trial of Socrates.